wildfires in Northern California, I worry about is the state going to get any disaster relief, that they need for the wildfires. I mean, it seems like the government, or at least not the government, but the administration is incredibly petty about such things. I worry about the people in California. I worry about all sorts. I worry a lot. I spend a lot of time so far, it's been okay. So far, I don't think I've had any sort of direct. I don't think I'm gonna lose my house. I don't think I'm gonna lose my health insurance, anything like that. But I can foresee a future where that's coming, and I worry about my fellow Americans. I think there's a lot to worry about, which is why I spend a lot of time faxing and emailing my representatives.
Yeah.
So
I think worrying is our national pastime now.
I think it is. I think it's good to take breaks, though. I mean, like I said before, not everybody can focus on it 100% of the time. I do find it good when I can step back and go to a movie and hang out with friends, maybe not look at the news for a couple of days, but it doesn't happen very often. I actually feel better when I'm plugged in.
Yeah. I hear you.
I'm sure you can you can relate.
It's very, very hard to unplug.
It really is. Every time I take a vacation, it takes me a good 3 or 4 days to unplug anyway, and then I just kind of feel like we've been at serious, on the brink of something horrible for the last 2 years, and now it's impossible, utterly impossible to unplug. But it's good for your mental health. You have to do it once in a while, even if it's just for short breaks.
Yes.
I don't know. Go make something. Go knit. Make something creative.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for talking to me.
Sure.
It's been really good. I like sort of getting a chance to hear about what different people do. I think it's neat. It's one of the neat parts of this podcast is sort of getting to hear just what my friends actually do in their day-to-day life.
And I would say, if people outside of Hollywood, they keep an eye on. You've seen it a little bit on TV now, but keep an eye on the movies and the TV shows and stuff that are going to come out in the next 6 months to a year.
Mm-hmm.
You start to see how much the things that we're worrying about now are reflected.
Yeah.
I mean, not just Veep, but in everything, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a mirror. So. Anyway, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Kelly. I'm back again for our third segment of this episode, and I am here with Anne Midgette. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Kelly.
Anne, would you like to tell us what your title is and why you might be joining us on a podcast about arts and politics?
Well, I'm the classical music critic of the Washington Post, and that puts me in the crosshairs of arts and politics in a number of ways, given that I'm in Washington, D.C., where the main venue that I cover is the Kennedy Center, which is obviously partly government-supported and intimately bound up in many ways with the government. And obviously, like all critics, I've been writing a lot about the effect of politics on our fields in the wake of the 2016 election, both hypothesizing about what effect a Trump presidency might have on the field, and then looking more at ways that artists themselves are affected and feel like they want to respond to what's going on or not.
Great. So I guess my first question would be whether there have been any sort of overt effects from the Trump administration on the arts. Are we seeing anything in the way of sort of budgets or policies that's directly affecting the arts yet?
No, not in my field. We have not seen direct effects. I think it's a level that's sort of below the broader notice at this point.
Right.
There's been a lot of anxiety, certainly, and a lot of possibly self-censoring. Sort of nobody wants to do anything that's going to cut their grants. At the same time, people want to have the ability to protest publicly. There was one opera, the Washington National Opera, which the composer really wanted to set up as an anti-Trump piece, and the administration was a little leery about doing that quite so aggressively. It all played out fine. I'm not sure anything has really attracted a lot of notice except the Kennedy Center honors. There was a bit of a brouhaha around who was going to be prepared to accept Kennedy Center honors this year, depending on how far the administration was going to be involved. The Kennedy Center honors are not actually tied up with the president. It's the Kennedy Center, but there has traditionally been a reception at the White House, and the president has traditionally attended. And this year, Trump did announce that he would not be attending, forestalling some of the expected criticisms from people who might not have accepted otherwise.
Okay. Do you get any sense that moving forward there could be anything, particularly in budgets, I guess, or, is there any worry about grants and things like that in the future? I know it's only been, feels like forever, but it's only been a year since the election, and so it might be a little bit early to see actual effects, but do you get the sense that there could be anything coming down the road?
Well, absolutely. And even as I said, I haven't seen any effects yet, I realize I'm blithely dismissing the threat to abolish the NEA, which is, of course, rather drastic.
Right.
The NEA, in terms of its actual donations compared to an average European country, the NEA is a pittance, but it's an important symbol and it plays an important role in arts funding around the country, often for smaller projects for whom a few $1,000s could make a huge difference in terms of establishing a grassroots presence. And that's something that Trump would think nothing about abolishing, but I can't remember exactly where that stands. I mean, there is still an NEA for the time being. I think a lot of these plans have not yet been put into action. That would have an effect on the country, certainly. That's a big one. As far as individual budgets, I don't think the Kennedy Center's budget is going to be axed. That's part of the national parks, although there was talk that we should cut back on the national parks. So I think nobody feels entirely secure.
What about with immigration? Have there been any actual problems getting performers or composers to the U.S., or have there been any concerns about, with immigrations or visas?
Yes, absolutely, no question. There are people who have had to cancel performances who have not been able to get visas in time. A couple of people who chose not to come, but I think there have been visa problems before the Trump administration too. But it has gotten more intense. And there was that story, which I should have checked before coming on here, of the Syrian musician he traveled out of the country. He's lived here for 1 million years and traveled out of the country and couldn't get back in for a performance of his. There have been people who have managed to make it in, but yes, that has been a greater concern. And it's always a concern in the international music world. Political exigencies can change that quite a bit. I mean, Brexit has had an effect as well.
Beyond the effect of sort of actual policies or actual budget, how, you touched on a little bit that there was a performance that they wanted to do that was sort of explicitly about Trump, but how in general is the art world reacting? Are there increased performances of a political nature or, perhaps planned for the future? Are people trying to ignore it in their actual artistic work?
It's always an interesting question of how artists choose to react to politics or not react to politics. And I think, in a sense, in our quicker society, we have a heightened expectation that art should react quickly. In the wake of 9/11, I did a piece about I think it was one journalist said it was really outrageous that nobody had responded artistically to 9/11 yet. And it was literally 11 days later. It takes a little while to gear up. There have to be thoughts happening first.
Right.
That said, certainly there was a lot of debate in the wake of the election, just on social media among artists that who were on my radar about how best to respond. Some people saying maybe we should stop making art for a while and go out there and, protest more actively. And other people saying, well, art is what we do. So, is there a way to make protest effective? I certainly saw composers setting political texts and offering the pieces free of charge to anybody who wanted to perform them, that kind of thing. But then there are people who are apolitical, and the ways in which the ways in which politics filter into art are not always straightforward either. In my 9/11 piece, I cited a couple of examples that were pretty clear, like the Crucible. Arthur Miller's The Crucible is a reaction to the McCarthy hearings. But even that took a few years of gestation, and the 9/11 pieces took a decade to kind of come through and evaluate and process. So I think that, some kinds of response are going to take a while, especially in the music world where everything is booked 2 or 3 years in advance. So you can't always tell, the things that are happening now are things that were all planned back in 2014, which was a very different world. That said, I think that we're seeing a kind of dystopian reality now that certainly has been presaged in a number of, novels and movies that seem suddenly prescient or timely. Music is a little different unless you're going to write a Donald Trump opera. The opera I was referring to was called The Dictator's Wife, and it was about a nameless authoritarian regime. And the idea was to costume the main character as Melania. It had already been done extensively in Pakistan with, local references. It was not written about Trump. The question was how far the production made it be about Trump. And there was a red necktie that figured in at one point, but it was a little bit subtle. And that was a little bit, in a way, that was riding on the coattails of the political situation here to give a piece that already had a life, a little more relevance, quote unquote. And there is no shame in an artist not reacting, and even an artist who has very strong political feelings. There has to still be validity to writing a novel about something else, or to painting a landscape if that's what it is in you to do. It is a fallacy to say that art is obliged to react in a certain way. One of the more amusing sort of reactions I saw, that was a very subtle reaction, but there was a Leonard Bernstein tribute to open the season this year, the National Symphony, and there was a set of 5 songs, and in the middle of that set came the song from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the sort of failed Bernstein musical, his last musical, and I think it's called Bless This House. I ought to know that right by heart. It's a big, rousing piece, and normally it would be at the end of the set, and they put it in the middle of the set, and they ended with I'm a Little Bit in Love, which is a very sort of sweet, mild ballad. And I said to my husband, I would bet you money that was programmed to be at the end of the set, but had it come then, everybody would have leapt to their feet and sort of outcry, and the Kennedy Center couldn't risk, being quite that blatant. Now, this is completely my surmise. I did not interview anybody and say, was this planned this way? But I would be very surprised if that's not what happened.
One question I have for you, since you write for a paper that has, sort of found itself in the midst of a lot of sort of politics in general, and especially recently, I've seen on some of the comments for the pieces you've written, and I'm sure you're seeing this in social media as well, that there seem to be sometimes sort of political reactions to pieces you write, whether or not the piece is explicitly about politics. Are you seeing more of that sort of thing recently since the election? Is that something that has sort of always been a reaction to the kind of stuff that you write?
That's an interesting question. Comments are always kind of mean. Like, I certainly have developed a thick skin over the years. But whether I see more specifically political comments, I mean, it's true that on the Washington Post website, in terms of the comments, it takes usually about 30 seconds to default to, you liberals are all, or, you Trump people are all, regardless of the subject of the piece. It's sometimes you'll have to really reach to make that happen. That said, I've had a couple of people comment on pieces of mine recently that got a lot of comment saying, my faith in humanity is restored. The comment thread that does not mention Trump. It's tricky in my field. I'm writing about music, and I, would hope that I am writing, pieces that could appeal to people across the political spectrum without taking political sides. And yet it's hard when you're writing about the arts to hide your politics completely. There is an assumption that the art world is anti-Trump, and I can't think of an example where I saw a lot of political reaction, except when I have specifically addressed Trump in a piece. I wrote a piece about Donald Trump and taste in the cultural elite, sort of talking about how Trump revels in having this kind of middle brow taste, and so is